Hi everyone, this is Jerry. The king of all media, Howard Stern, still has the bug for playing chess. In fact, in February of 2010, he took part in a chess tournament in New York, scoring 2 out of 4 points, which is quite good, considering it was his first USCF rated event. This particular game that I'm going to go through is one that he had actually played in July of 2009. It was played online, and it had some fairly lengthy time controls to it. Both players began with 45 minutes apiece, and whenever a move was played, that player gained 45 seconds on their clock. Going into this game, Howard's opponent on the white side had a rating of 1766, while Howard had a rating of 1685, so neither player a beginner to the game, that's for sure. Both players having good ratings, and we have a good game as a result. Let's have a look. D4, Howard replies knight f6, c4 and e5. This signals the Budapest Defense. Of the handful of games that I've gone through of Howard's, this is the second time that I've seen this defense employed by him, and it has its fair share of venom to it, that's for sure. It has a lot of traps associated with it. I'll just go ahead and show you a couple traps which end up having black essentially killing white very, very quickly. If we see d5, not to be recommended, we could see just bishop out, followed by, if white tries to get aggressive with this bishop g5 move, pinning the knight to the queen, we could just see knight here, and if you grab my queen, I'm going to end up grabbing your king. Bishop f2, and then that's lights out. That's just one trap. Here's one other one, knight g4, and a lot of the attention is really just centered around this e5 move, or this e5 pawn here. Both sides looking to just attack that pawn. White defends the pawn, followed by bishop out, knight block, queen here, and after a move like a3 hitting the bishop, we could ignore that threat, grab this pawn. If you grab my bishop, I play here, knight d3, that's mate. That's just one of the very many traps, or that's just another of the very many traps that come about from this Budapest defense. How the game goes is just pawn takes pawn, followed by knight g4, knight f3, and bishop c5. So pressure against f2, how to meet that threat. e3 is the only reasonable move, making way for the bishop's development and parrying the threat of bishop takes on f2. Knight c6, more development. This pawn is now hit twice. Black is ready to regain that pawn. a3, what does that look to do? It looks to advance b4, expanding in the center, making way for the bishop to come here, and it all at the same time hitting the bishop on c5. a5 has a dual purpose. Its primary focus is really just to prevent this b4 advance. And there is this rare instance, and this is the only opening that I've seen this in chess, where there's the possibility for this type of early rook lift. You know, typically you would see this as a very beginner-like type of move, to move your rook pawn and then bring your rook up and over type of thing, but oddly enough, you do see this come about in a rare instance out of the Budapest defense. This is all prior to this pawn's advancement. You could see this rook coming to a6 and coming over to maybe, let's say, this g5 square. We don't see that in this particular game, but it's something to be aware of. Queen d5 hits the bishop and defends this e5 pawn, but that's easily met with queen to e7, multi-purpose move. What is it doing? It's guarding the bishop, and it's hitting this e5 pawn for a third time. So this pawn is now going to fall. You know, white was hanging on to that for a few moves, but it's going down now. So what does white do in the meantime? Well, just get more pieces out. So that's exactly what we see. Knight c3, more development. This pawn is grabbed on e5, followed by bishop e2. d6 makes way for the bishop's development, followed by both sides castling. So we're essentially past the phase of any tactical sort of ideas that stem from the Budapest defense. There's a lot of tricks in it, but we're beyond that stage. So now we have to look to more technical type of moves. You know, where there's slight positional disadvantages or advantages in one side. So let's see how things progress from here. We have b3, trying to get the bishop on its longest diagonal. Rook e8, very logical move, half open file, makes sense to want to place your rook on it. Queen to e4, I'm not quite sure this particular queen's placement. I think its primary purpose is to just vacate this d5 square. You know, after queen e4, this knight is ready to just hop into d5, hit the queen, cause black a headache. But maybe why not just come here? I think that seems to be a bit more a reasonable square for the queen. Just try to get her out of any harm's way. There still are 3 minor pieces that are kind of in this territory maybe, or at least could chase the queen if she was in this section of the board. I think maybe queen d2 is a bit more safe. But nevertheless, what we did see is queen e4. This knight is ready to hop in d5. So that's why we're seeing c6. It guards both d5 and also b5. There is a drawback with this c6 move. What's the drawback exactly? Well, while it watches over one thing, what it's now not doing is watching over d6. Why might this be a problem? Well, looking on the white side, what we have to realize is that this is a half open file, and so we're going to have to anticipate one of the white rooks landing on d1. And now since we've moved to c6, this pawn is now going to need support by the black pieces. So not really a position you want to be in as black, but you also don't want to have to tolerate a knight landing on this d5 square. So unfortunately there's going to be some pressure against this d6 point right here, but Howard does well to go ahead and defend that d6 pawn. So a lot of the attention from this point in the game is now going to be centered around this pawn on d6. Bishop b2, bishop e6, more development. Queen f4 makes way for, I believe, just knight to e4. Rook on a to d8, followed by rook on f to d1. So we have the first phase here, one of the rooks placing itself on the d file, and soon enough we're going to see the doubling of rooks. Knight g6 hits the queen, queen back, followed by bishop f5. What is this doing? It's getting ready to win a pawn. Fork of the rook and pawn. Bishop d3 is how white reacts. Another way that white could react is to simply play rook to d2. What does this do? Well, it stops that little trick, followed by, well, it stops the trick and also makes way to just double the rooks. But we don't see that. Instead, bishop d3, the exchange of bishops, followed by knight e5. So the rook is hit, simply backs up, makes way for still the doubling, and in anticipation of the pressure that's going to mount against d6, we have rook to d7 and rook on e to d8 coming about. Knight to a4, 2 things going on. This is a strong move. We're reaching a very critical position here. This knight hits the bishop. It releases the bishop's strength. There's now pressure against this e5 knight. What to do exactly? f6, its primary purpose really to lend support to this e5 knight. Also, there might be the possibility of maybe bringing the knight to f7, g5, and e4. That may seem a bit far-fetched, but it at least has that sort of possibility in mind. This knight, keep in mind, if it is to come to this f7 square, that is another way to maybe lend support to the d6 pawn. One other thing to recognize with this f6 move is that it allows for a flight square. This isn't the most ideal type of flight square. A better type of flight square would be, let's say, maybe having the king running to h7 in the event that one of the white heavy pieces gets to the back rank, but we want to serve its primary purpose, f6, guard the knight, and also there's the possibility for coming to f7 as a flight square. So bishop to c3, definitely a critical position. This pawn is hanging, no defenders on it. How to really meet this threat? The bishop not only is getting ready to grab this pawn, but when it does grab that pawn, it would then be hitting this rook. So a very critical position. How exactly to react from here? If you're too passive as black in this position, let's say just rook coming here, that could really just spell disaster. It's important to try and generate some sort of counterplay on the black end here, and that's exactly what we see going on from this point. b5 comes about, and now there's pressure against this knight. Knight takes bishop. We have a series of exchanges going on, and we quickly enter an endgame as a result. After the bishop takes pawn, white is up a pawn. There's tension between these rooks now, and soon enough they're just wiped off the board. And that's fairly typical, actually, when you have a half open file like that. If that pawn was exchanged like it was, we could just see all of the heavy pieces going off the board, or at least the rook, sometimes the queen as well. But what we just had after those series of exchanges was a big transition. We went from the middle game, now all of a sudden we're in an end game. Who's better in this position? Well, material-wise, black is down a pawn. However, where is there maybe a deficiency on the white side? The deficiency comes in the form of back rank problems. You know, there's no flight square for this white king, and so Howard makes good use of that. Starting with one queen d6, hits the bishop, and we have bishop to e1. A slight improvement is to just play this f4 move. That's probably a difficult move to want to make. Just this counterattacking type of move, allowing your opponent to maybe grab that bishop. But f4 is the move to be recommended from this position. What we did see instead was bishop to e1, and now white is going to end up finding themselves in a giant knot. Starting with queen d1, this bishop is pinned, and black is threatening just a mate in one. After f4, more fuel is just added to the fire. Knight, bishop converging on the bishop. There's only king to f1. That's the best move. That's the only move, really. So white is really just tied up from here. One other thing to point out is that the queen and knight tandem are very, very good. They're very, very tricky. They work very well together, often much better than a queen and bishop combination. And the reason for that is because the queen and knight really just cover the whole spectrum of piece movements in the game of chess. What we saw next was queen takes pawn. One thing that I had questioned when I reviewed this game was why not, recognizing that white is in this pin right here. All these pieces are in an unfortunate state such that they have to watch over this bishop. Why not just run this pawn down? We could create a passed pawn starting with one c4. How would white really respond to that? After I looked at it closely, we would see just the recapturing on c4 like that, followed by f5, and now there's the possibility of these perpetual checks coming into play. Starting with queen to b8, who knows, queen b7, etc. Just checking this king around. And if black tries to just play h6, we could see check, king here, and then the queen just coming all the way back, where the threat now is just to play queen to g6. For example, if black pushes, we could see queen here, and we just have the queen oscillating on g6 and e8. That would turn out to be perpetual check. So it's not so easy to just go ahead and push forward, in other words, with this c pawn. Instead, what we see is the material being balanced now. The queen regains that pawn, and we have e4 next. Probably better is just to play f5 again, just to allow this queen more possibilities. This queen is a very powerful piece, so to really open up another diagonal for her, or another file, or a rank, or whatever, is likely to be a good thing. To give her more possibilities, I think, is most important from this point right here. So that's why I'm saying f5 is probably best from here. But instead, what we do see is e4, and this is pretty much the beginning of the end. How Howard follows up very nicely. Queen c4, this is a multi-purpose move. What is it doing? It's getting ready to just move the knight with discovered check, and also just grab this pawn here. So white unfortunately has to just shift the king away to dodge the discovered check, and black could just grab this pawn, a nice central queen, central knight, and this king has to be very scared whenever there's a knight in proximity to it. So bishop c3, what does this move do? Well, apparently it's getting ready to just snip this pawn, since the queen is pinning the pawn here to the king. That's met with king to f7, h3, finally a flight square, but it's too little too late. c4, passed pawns must be pushed, queen g4, looking to maybe start checking this king around, but we have just some fairly good technique coming about here. Queen e3, king h2, queen takes pawn. This is going to be game over. There's really no way to prevent the exchange of queens here. If the king went here, we could see just queen check. We could maybe win the bishop, but again, we would have to be a bit careful of perpetual check. If the king did go in the corner, we would just have queen check, king here, same thing going on. eventually, since there's this fork here, the queens would eventually come off the board. So after queen e3, this is essentially forcing the exchange of queens, and as a result, this is going to be game over very soon. So king h2, queen takes pawn, queen g3, and now we have black at this point taking on g3. Slightly better is just to play, king to e6, seeing how, this queen isn't going anywhere. We're going to have the exchange of queens. So why exchange queens and, bring the white king a bit closer to the center? That's where he wants to be. Why not just recognize that this queen isn't going anywhere? Let's just bring our king a bit closer to the center. But as it went in this game, it really doesn't matter that the tempo gaining type of moves. If the position was a bit more critical, it would be better to, of course, play as technical as possible. Just bring the king closer to the center and not bring your opponent's king closer to the center. But as it went in this game, it really doesn't matter. There's a huge advantage in the form of material. We have some good technique, king coming close to the center, and there's really no way to you really can't do anything as white at this point. It's just a tough position to play through. I mean, where can this bishop go to attack anything, really? We have an instance where all these black pieces are on light squares now, so there's nothing for it to attack. g4, I'm not sure what the point of that was, but it's just really downhill from here. Black already has one passed pawn, and after this lashing out with g4, we have just another pawn going off the board, followed by king e2, knight g3, king f2, knight h5, hitting the bishop. Bishop c3, better king improvement, and soon enough we have just this pawn advancing, this pawn threatening to advance, and white can't stop both things. After king to f3, we have a position here where white ends up resigning. So that's all for this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see more games played by Howard Stern in the near future. Take care. Bye.